If you've been following me for a while, then you know how passionate I am about helping people have the right information so they can make the right decisions and have a better path to parenthood and a better parenting experience. And I've met somebody who feels exactly the same. Her name is Alease Daniel Barnes, and she's an embryologist and has a wealth of information to share with us today. So let's run the tape. Welcome to Building Your Family. This is a podcast about fertility treatment, donor conception, surrogacy, and all the ways the modern family is built. My name is Lisa Schumann. I'm your host. I'm a published author, I'm a researcher, I'm a therapist, and I'm so happy today to introduce you to somebody that I really feel a kinship with. Her name is Alease Daniel Barnes, and she is an embryologist and an educator. She makes it her job to not only help people in the lab, but help people online. She helps people understand so many things from egg freezing to ICSI and you name it. She really talks about it all. And she will talk about her own private journey, which she's going to talk about today as well. So I'm so excited to have her here. Thank you so much, Alease, for coming. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm very much excited to be here and looking forward to it.
Well, I know you're traveling around and you've got so much going on, but it was so great to see you at ASRM and the Social Media Summit. And you help so many people online and in the lab. And I want to talk about both of those things with you because I know you're a big advocate for telling the truth and being very clear and helping people understand what they need to believe and what not to believe. I really feel so strongly, as I know you do, that people who go through this process are so vulnerable and very often hurting. And there are people out there that really, intentionally or not, prey on their sensitivity and their anxiety and their desire to have a family by giving them all sorts of methods that are not research based, that don't necessarily help, and really sometimes even hurt people. So I really appreciate what you're doing and would love to hear a little bit about what made you decide to be an educator online.
Yeah, thank you so much for the kind words. I appreciate it. For me, I was at the time when I started my page, it was about 2021. I was one of the only full-time people in the lab. So I was fielding pretty much all of the patient questions that were lab related. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm getting the same like 2 or 3 questions a day. There has got to be a better way to communicate this, not only to the patients that I'm seeing here, but if patients here are having these same questions, patients everywhere have to be having these questions. So I started my Instagram page and really wanted to make the lab more transparent. So be more transparent about what we're doing and do it in a way that was fun and a little bit more lighthearted because I know the journey can be very difficult and understandably so, but I wanted it to feel more lighthearted. And so I started with, if you scroll back far enough, I started with still posts and then decided, you know what? Patients actually want to see what we're doing. How can I
Mm-hmm.
show that in a way that's still respectful and following all guidelines, obviously? And so
Right.
I was able to kind of show clips here and there and really give people an inside look on what we do in the lab. And I really think people resonated with that. It was something they had never gotten to see before. And so it was really cool to be able to give patients that perspective and that education.
I think that's fabulous. And it's so important to make it more approachable so people don't feel intimidated. But also, I think it's really important to disseminate the right sort of information, which you're doing in a way that, yes, is approachable and playful, but really clear and so helpful, I think, to patients everywhere because they really need to get the right information. So could we talk about a few of those subjects and those things that you talk about online?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You have a little graphic on the top of your Instagram page about Mythbusters, and I know you did a little series there about different things that people should know, kind of like in a fun, true or false sort of way. How did you come up with that, and what are some of the things that you felt were most important for people to understand?
Yeah, so I started with the questions that people asked me the most, the questions that I got all the time in the lab, or things I was hearing from friends where I was like, where did you hear that? That is not true.
Like what? Like what?
Yes, I think the biggest thing is that IVF guarantees you success. People are like, oh, you can just do IVF. You don't like, why are you stressing about getting pregnant? Like, you just go do IVF, you'll be fine. And as we both know, that is definitely not the case. Anyone who is listening knows that IVF does not guarantee you anything. There are so many patients who have to do multiple rounds of IVF, have to consider third party reproduction to grow their family, and for those who decide to walk away from treatment and to decide to be childless not by choice or to pursue other ways of parenthood. So IVF does by no means guarantee that you bring home a baby or bring home a baby in the way that you had originally envisioned when you were ready to start growing your family. So that's one that I have to talk to people about a lot. I'm like, IVF is not something that you can just do and it's going to be successful.
Yeah, that's a hard pill to swallow, isn't it?
It is. It is a bit of a
Yeah.
hard pill to swallow, and hoping that the information out there now is more accessible and kind of better information, so patients who are coming into this process have a little bit more understanding of what the process could really look like for them.
Yeah. And they can manage their expectations a little bit
Exactly.
better. Yeah. And what other things do people need to know?
The other thing that I talk about a lot is the attrition of going from, that scan right before
Mhm.
retrieval
Mhm.
to the number of embryos and what that really looks like. Obviously, it's very dependent on each patient, but in general, we see a fairly large attrition from the number of eggs retrieved to the number of embryos, and then from the number of embryos to the number of live births. And so that attrition is something that I talk about a lot. We're seeing about 80% of the eggs that we retrieve, 80 plus, be mature, which are the ones that we are injecting if we're doing ICSI. And then we're seeing, about 80% of those be fertilized. And then we're seeing about 50% of fertilized eggs make it to blastocyst. And so if you're starting with 10 eggs, those numbers start to drop really quickly. And it can be really scary when you're in that waiting period of trying to learn how many embryos you're going to have kind of at the end of that week.
Yeah, it is really scary for people. And even when they're using third party reproduction, right? If they're using donor eggs, then they say, oh, it's so wonderful that this donor has 8 eggs or that I'm going to get 8 eggs. I've got a whole basketball team here, but that's not necessarily the case. They may have one baby from one batch of frozen eggs. And that's really hard to swallow. But again, I think it's good that you're talking about this because people do need to manage their expectations. It does help them in the long run. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what about other issues like you have a few videos of ICSI and some other procedures that you're doing. How do people feel about that? I know sometimes there's some controversy online about people who are either very religious or don't understand it or feel that there's certain ways that they interpret it that may not be correct. Has that been difficult for you?
That's a byproduct of being online, and there have been times where it's a great opportunity to educate and people are open to that conversation, and I'm able to kind of share with them what I know from my experience, and it helps enlighten them, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know that." I'm thank you for explaining it to me. But then there's always the people who are not open to having that conversation. They, have their thoughts, and they're not willing to see a different perspective, and that happens. And there are times where it's like, this is not necessarily worth my energy and my time. And you move on from those conversations. They don't leave you feeling that great. But ultimately,
No.
there are more people. I have found that there are more people who really want to learn and know someone or are that person who has gone through it, and they want to be able to support a friend or a family member or gain some perspective themselves. And are open to having that conversation. And those are the ones that you kind of hang on to on the days where you're getting not so nice comments or messages.
Yeah, it's so hard. I've been there myself. It's so difficult, but I really appreciate you hanging on because there are so many important things that you share. So, all of you out there who don't know Alease's platform, you need to see all of the information she disseminates about periods, about sperm production, about whether or not you should carry your sperm close to your body when you're bringing it into the clinic, or if you can use a special condom or not, and all of these issues that, or an HSG, what does that really mean? So all of these things that people wonder about and they're confused about, and very often you go to the doctor and you get all of this information and you're anxious and you have a very hard time digesting it all. So I think it's great that people can go to your platform and get that information sometimes for the second or third time because they need to hear it and they need to be able to process this so they can understand what all these procedures are. So that's great. It's really wonderful.
Thank you so much. And I always find that the visuals are helpful because it's very
Yes,
different to have a conversation and you're hearing the information, but then when you see it, I feel like it sticks a little bit more. And so I always
absolutely.
hope that that helps patients.
Oh, I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. I love looking at your videos, so they're
Oh,
great.
thank you. I
You're
appreciate it. Yeah,
welcome.
one of my favorite ones is the ICSI video
Yeah,
because
I
like
love
people are
that.
like, "Oh my gosh, this is it. This is it. This is how it's
It's
done."
so
I'm like,
cool.
"Yeah, that's it. That's what we're doing, all of the time in the lab." And so it's nice to show those things and then showing sperm is always really fun too because it always looks
Right.
super fun swimming around under the microscope. So
Uh-huh.
there's a couple of things that I always know people will enjoy seeing.
Uh-huh. Yes, they love it. So it's those things are great. And I think it's wonderful that you're providing all that education. What happens when you see other things? Like you're giving all of this really helpful information, but you probably are online and you see, if you eat 4 pineapples today, you can rejuvenate your eggs. Or if you do this yoga pose, you can get pregnant more easily, or what have you. It must be very frustrating to see that. I know it is for me.
It's frustrating in the sense that there's so many other things I want to talk about, right? But I have to spend some of my time just so people know what is correct and what isn't.
Hmm.
And so that can definitely be frustrating, but I've learned that is there a way I can teach people to be able to decipher this information on their own? Like, can I teach people how to make sure information is credible? And then that may save me some work on the back end and having to constantly, say things are incorrect if patients can help decipher that on their own. So I've shifted my perspective a little bit on, yes, every once in a while I'm going to talk about this video that's incorrect, but I really try not to spread more of it because the more you talk about it, the more like, the algorithms love that stuff because they love controversial things and, they love things that people are interacting on and things like that. And so I try to say, hey, like, how did I decide this was incorrect? And how can you do the same thing? And so we can stop perpetuating some of the information that's incorrect. And so I actually just was writing about this. I'm working on some editing for a book for a very dear friend, which I'm excited to come out. I'll share that when when it's time. Make sure that you're getting correct information because just because someone has a lot of followers doesn't mean that they have the correct information. Followers do not equal
Yes.
knowledge or
Yes.
accreditation or education. And so you really have to do your due diligence and making sure
Yes.
that the education that you're or the information that you're exposing yourself to is correct information.
Yes, 100%. Absolutely. And people do fall prey to that too easily, right? And as you said, the algorithm will show you people who are popular, not necessarily people who are accredited or licensed or any of those things. And that's really why we built the membership that we have because there are no professionally led membership programs out there. And it's so important to make sure that professionals are disseminating professional information. So I really appreciate that. Imagine your beautiful future. You're snuggling with your child. You feel so connected to them. Your friends and family are so happy, and you have everything that you've ever wanted. I want this for you too, but I want more than that. I want you to feel secure knowing that you've made the best decisions, not just short term, but long term for your future family. Wherever you are on your journey, whether you're choosing a donor, choosing a clinic, learning how to talk to your donor conceived child about their origins, all of these decisions will have wider implications for your future. And I want you to have the right resources so you can feel empowered and confident at this very important time in your life. That's why I'm so excited to introduce you to Building Your Family. It's the only expert-guided platform designed for parents and parents-to-be using reproductive medicine. We provide unique strategies that you won't find anywhere else to make your path to parenthood smoother and more informed. And that's why our approach is about offering practical and actionable steps that you can use right now. Whether you're just starting out or already deep into your process, Building Your Family is here to guide you with expert advice, specialized education, stress reduction strategies, and a community to support you every step of the way. We can't wait to see you inside. I'm wondering, Alease, I know that as you start to think about all of these things and share your opinions and your feelings about things, you're also starting to share some personal things online, right? And some people do and some people don't. You started to share your own journey in fertility treatment with your egg freezing process. So since you're online starting to talk about it, would you feel comfortable sharing a little bit of that with us now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I throughout this whole process, I'm really trying to be as transparent as I can be, the good and the bad, because I want people to be educated. That's my whole goal. I want people to have the knowledge to be able to ask informed questions when they're with their providers, and even with their friends and family, to be able to speak on their journey if they so choose, confidently. So yes, I have frozen my eggs. It's been a couple years that I've been considering it. I found out a couple years ago that my ovarian reserve wasn't as high as I expected. It's a little lower for my age. And so when I initially got that testing done, I was like, well, that doesn't necessarily mean that I can't conceive spontaneously. And that is still the case. I still very much could conceive spontaneously. But should I consider preserving my fertility if I want to wait to have a family, and so, or to grow my family, because I believe you are your family, you and your pet is your family, you and your partner is a family.
Whatever you make as your family is your family.
Exactly. And so through that experience, my husband and I discussed, do what is our timeline for growing a family? Is that now? Is that in the future? If it is in the future, do we want to consider other ways to preserve fertility? And so ultimately, I think we decided that egg freezing was the best option for us. We're still very
Hmm.
much on the fence as to if, having children is what we want to do. And I'm very much enjoying my season of life right now and working and educating people. And so if that is in the cards for us and something we want to do, it's not right now. So deciding to freeze eggs to give us a little bit more time to enjoy the things that we're enjoying and think a little bit more about what our future looks like, was something that we decided to do. So it was different having a perspective of an embryologist going into this. I knew more than most do going into this journey, and good and bad. I think
Hmm.
you end up knowing the good things and the bad things, and it can get you a
Hmm.
little psyched out sometimes. So I'm glad I have that perspective, and hopefully it allows me to support patients in a different way than I have in the past.
Having gone through it yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm sure. So we were talking a little bit before we started this podcast about my egg freezing research and how in the research that I published, feeling like you don't want to have any regrets was the number one reason why people were freezing their eggs way back when I published this research. And we were talking about that might be one of the reasons why you froze your eggs. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. My feelings around having children varies from day to day for
Hmm.
sure. And so I don't want to have any regrets in the future. But we also chatted that majority of people who freeze their eggs ultimately don't come back to use them. And
Yes.
so that was another reason why we decided on eggs and not embryos. I think it's a lot of times there's assumptions that people who are freezing their eggs are single, and they're like, why aren't you creating embryos? You're married and you've been married for a few years now. And, if it's something that we don't come back to, eggs was something we were more comfortable with. So I find that very interesting as well.
Would you mind sharing a little bit more about that, Elise? Because I'm sure people out there would be curious about that. Because, yes, we're in a different place than we used to be in terms of freezing embryos versus freezing eggs. But I think a lot of people get nervous freezing eggs because they still feel like embryos have a slightly better chance and they're kind of worried about it. So, what was that differentiating factor for you?
For us, since My reason for freezing is a little bit more social, although there are some medical things with my lower ovarian reserve that did come into consideration. Because we were not sure if we want to have children, we were willing to have the lower chance of creating embryos in pregnancy with freezing eggs compared to embryos. Research is still showing for a majority of population that isn't like donor eggs, we are seeing lower survival rates in eggs and that sort of deal compared to embryos. And so it does give us a slightly lower chance, right? But we didn't want to have to decide what we would want to do with embryos in the future if we didn't use them. The fact that we would have to make a decision on that in the future was something that I wasn't willing to do right now. I was like, if we come back to these, then we can cross that bridge when we get there. And there were so many more decisions that had to be made if we were going to create embryos. So we would have to decide, do we want to consider conventional insemination versus ICSI? Do we want to do PGT testing? How many embryos are we going to create?
So, Alease, I know it's a tough topic and it's very sensitive, and lots of people have all kinds of ideas about embryos. And we certainly know that there's a science and lots of scientific ideas and thoughts and feelings about the science, but there's also lots of feelings about spirituality and emotional feelings and embryos and all of that. But leaving that aside for a second, I think we also know that it can be difficult to have an embryo even if you're in a couple, because if God forbid something happens to one of you, or God forbid you get divorced, and people say, oh, I'm going to be fine, right? Even when people use a donor and that they're best friends with, they say, we're going to be fine. But the truth is, half of all marriages end in divorce, right? So you can always be more secure using eggs because you don't know. Like, God forbid that if something happens, what do you do with the embryos? Who gets them? And then you can be in a tough situation. I had a couple once that I worked with, and they were really, really stressed because the wife wanted a second child and the husband didn't want one, or the ex-husband. And she said, this is my only chance. We have these frozen embryos. And he said, we're divorced and I don't want to participate in having another child. I'm ready to be retired. I don't want this to be. And she said, I'll take full responsibility, but legally you can't. If you're the parent, you can't just relinquish responsibility. And emotionally, how can you do that? So I think it is really a tough situation to be in when you're separating, or if, God forbid, one of you passes away. And I guess that's something that you were thinking about too.
Definitely. Ultimately, eggs, I felt like, gave us more flexibility. And, it's a hard conversation to have when you're like married and you've been married for a few years and you're like, I want to freeze eggs. I don't want to create embryos together. Right. I was like, oh my gosh, how's my husband going to take this? And ultimately, I do feel like it protects both of us in the future, because I had so many people after I shared that I'm creating eggs and not embryos, and because of some of these reasons. And I had people reaching out to me saying, I am in this situation. I am in the middle of a divorce and I want to use the embryos that we created and my partner doesn't, and vice versa. And I didn't want that to be our story. God forbid nothing's going to happen. I'm very happy that, we wanted to have more options. And I felt like freezing eggs gave us that option. And so it was the right decision for us. I know lots of other people, when I shared that, I had an embryologist say, I'm not married and we just froze embryos. And so everyone has different thoughts on that. And for us, it was what made the most sense and it worked for us. And we're very happy with how things turned out. So it's not an easy thing to decide. There was
It's
a lot
not
of
easy.
conversations, a lot of thoughts, and sleeping on it, and we'll talk about it again tomorrow. And it worked out for us.
That's great. And then I guess another hard question would be, how do you decide how many rounds you're going to do?
That one I'm still in the thick of. I'm going to be honest,
Mm-hmm.
because I have done a cycle now. I'm feeling lots of things. But in general, I had 16 retrieved, 14 frozen, and there are some great calculators out there that can give you estimates on your probability of success, which obviously is an estimate. No one can predict the future. But in general, I have a good probability of having one child with the eggs that I have frozen. And so I'm debating, I think if we decide to have children, we'd want more than one. But if we don't decide to have children, I will have done an extra cycle and have not needed them. And so it's hard to balance that. It's hard to have this number in your head that makes you feel okay. At least for me, I keep thinking, "Oh, this is the number and I'll feel good." But then, like, if I reach that, because going into this, I had in my head like 6 to 8, I would feel good about. And I got almost double that. And I'm still
Mhm.
kind of like, oh, is
I
that
don't know.
gonna be what I really
Yes.
want? So it's hard. And I've decided to take some time to think about it. If I decide to do another cycle, it won't be this year. That was a big lesson that I learned is I remember a week after my retrieval, I was finally starting to feel back to normal. And then a couple days later, I get my period, right? And I'm like, patients who do back to back cycles would be doing a baseline. And
Mhm.
that is when I really was like, man, these patients are strong because I was like, no way. No way am I going back to do another cycle right now. I don't
It's a
feel
lot.
physically ready, emotionally ready. And that was the moment it hit me where I was like, man, patients would be going in and starting meds in a couple days. And I'm not even
Mhm.
close to being ready to do that again. Patients go through a lot. And so for me, it will definitely be a little while if I decide to
Mhm.
do another cycle, but I will share. I will definitely share if that's something that I decide to do because I've enjoyed being transparent and kind of being on the other side of it. And the community is so supportive. And it's been great to share openly with very little fear of being attacked or anything. People have been very supportive.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I think what's important and you start to point out that it's so different for every person, right? Everybody's going to have, and we talked a little bit before this about another paper that I published about whether or not you are willing to have children who are not genetically connected to you. And that can be something that can inform your plans for egg freezing. Because if you are willing to use donor eggs, for example, you don't necessarily need to freeze all those eggs, right? But then the other factor you're bringing up is, do you want to have children or not? Because that plays a role as well. Maybe you're not going to be as aggressive in freezing as many eggs if that's something you're not sure of. So there's so many factors and so many things to think about. And it's such an individual decision that really needs to be made solely by that person and their partner if they have one and their doctor. And that's really it because there's no hard and fast rule to this, right?
Yeah, and like I was telling people, I'm like, I wish I knew. Like I wish was this person who just knew either way that I want children or I don't want children, but I feel like I'm in this middle ground and it's frustrating. And so I know there are other people that feel the same way and
Yes.
it's there's so many factors like you were saying. So many things to consider and definitely not an easy decision by any means, at least for me. I'm a person who teeters back and forth a lot, and so decisions
Hmm.
are hard. But my dad always used to say, and he still says, and I try to live by that, is once I've made a decision, I try to work to make that the right decision. It may not
Mm.
always feel like the right decision, but I can work towards making that be the right decision for me. And so I do think sometimes decisions also require you to work to make it right. And sometimes it is the wrong decision. I'm not saying people always make the right decision, but you can definitely work it in and work it out and have it be the decision because some decisions you can't go back and change. And so how can I work to make this work for me?
Right. Because once you've done it, you don't want to be miserable and regret it your whole
Exactly.
life. You want to really try to embrace it the best way you
Mhm.
can. And we all have, as you see, and I think everyone out there knows, partially because of all the great education that's out there that you contribute to, that sometimes our lives are very, very different when we start this process than they are down the line, right? Sometimes we decide we don't want children later, or sometimes we decide we want more children than we thought, or if sometimes we have children and we say we want to be stay-at-home parents and then we get the child and we think, oh my God, get me back to work. Or sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes you think you want to go back to work and you're happy to be home. So you just don't know. And with every chapter of life, we have all different experiences. And I think that that's so important. What you're saying is that we really need to appreciate that and accept that even if we go to this next chapter in life, if it's not what we expect, we have to try to make the best of what we have.
Yeah, absolutely. And pivoting and try to make things work. I think that's 100%. I agree.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on tonight. How can people reach you, Alease? How can people connect with you?
Absolutely. People can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Alease the Embryologist. I am very friendly over DMs. Sometimes it takes me a couple days to get back to someone, but feel free to shoot me a message if you have questions. Obviously, I cannot give medical advice. I am not a physician, but I'm happy to chat, provide support, and answer questions here and there if anyone would like to reach out.
And great education. So everyone should really take a look if you're curious about any of these things, PGT, using CoQ10, all of these things that are, have a wide range of interests there. You can find them on her platform and get lots of great information. So rely on her, and thank you for all you do, Alease. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It's really been a pleasure, and hopefully we'll get to do this again.
That'd be great. That'd be great. And thank you for all of you who come here every week. We really appreciate you being here. And please subscribe because that's how we keep going. So thank you, and I will see you next week. Hi, it's Lisa Schumann. I hope that you enjoyed that video, and I hope it helped you. And if it did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe because that's how we keep going. It's really important to us. And if you liked it, you might like this one.